So let's switch gears and talk about transportation. Before we do that, let's check back in with another colleague of mine over at KSDK, Mike Rush.
A powerful visual, a school bus with a prop resembling a piece of bridge crushing it.
This bus signifies all that is wrong with our current transportation system.
The backdrop for organized labor and others supporting Amendment 7.
It infuses about $5.4 billion over 10 years into MoDOT's budget.
With a temporary sales tax increase of 3/4 cent, over that decade, MoDOT projects the St. Louis region would receive nearly $1.5 billion and funding improvements, including 64 bridge projects. State Representative Dave Henson sponsored the bill.
I think that's very important for the local officials being able to have some say into how they fund their projects.
MoDOT says it would replace these aging I-44 bridges over the Merrimack River, but not all projects measure up to this image. $2 million in funding to evaluate improvements on I-170 and $4 million for the Traffic Management Center in St. Louis are also classified as road and bridge projects.
It sounds like an unfortunate scare tactic.
But David Stokes' biggest concern isn't the bus. The policy analyst with the Show Me Institute disagrees with the way Amendment 7 would pay for transportation improvements that he agrees are needed.
Paying for our roads with general sales tax dollars means that that person who walks to work or bikes to work is going to pay every bit the same as the over-the-road truckers or the long-distance commuters.
But labor unions believe it's a good temporary fix.
Mike Rush there from KSDK News Channel 5. You know, when we first covered that, I think the visual got a little bit of a collective eye roll, at least on social media. Was that an overstatement? Was it a scare tactic, or can we establish in some way that our bridges and roads really are in that bad a shape?
Well, I think it was overstating it. I think that's pretty obvious, but maybe that was the point, maybe. You know, I took a ride with one of MoDOT's engineers, as I think I said a couple of weeks ago, and he pointed out the various deficiencies on I-270, including taking me under a bridge and showing me literally the bridge crumbling. Now, it wasn't a huge block of concrete like it was on that bus, but it was like little bits of the bridge on the ground. And I would assume that that's probably replicated across the state, which would probably make the transportation repair need real. The question is this the right mechanism to do this?
Let's talk about that mechanism real quick. So this is a 3/4% sales tax increase.
Yes.
I'm sorry, yes. Of a cent, thank you, I apologize. Billions of dollars over the next decade to fix roads, repair bridges, improve mass transit.
I will say, we did an analysis of the transportation tax list, and I would say 80% is road and bridge or highway related as far as the total amount of money. Now, it should be noted, as I said before, that MoDOT typically doesn't give any money to mass transit. So giving any bits of money to this extent is a paradigm shift to some extent. But I think that on one side of the equation, especially people who are very much boosters of mass transit, they think it's completely inadequate given how much the sales tax is going to be raised. And they think that more money should have gone there.
Well, and there's some people who say that this is the wrong mechanism, that it should be the gas tax. Missouri is one of the lowest, if not the lowest, gas tax in the country. And so there's some who say, well, what we should be doing is increasing the gas tax. And some of the proponents of the sales tax, including the Missouri Chamber of Commerce, have said, well, but the gas tax has been bringing in less money because cars are more efficient, so they're not using as much
People
gas.
Are driving less too.
And so
that's true nationwide.
So yes, so they're saying that this may be the only way to raise some of this money, but then you have a lot of groups who say, yeah, but then this is regressive. A sales tax hits people who spend. If you have a large family and don't have a lot of money, you're going to spend more on this gas tax than somebody who's wealthy and maybe buys most of their stuff out of the state.
I just want to make a quick point. The ads for this came out yesterday as expected because the proponents of this have raised literally millions of dollars, primarily from entities that would benefit from this tax, contractors, engineering firms, et cetera. And not once does it say on that ad that this is a tax increase. And I think it was, we actually asked Dan Mean about that yesterday. I asked if it was purposeful, and he said, oh, absolutely. Because when you say something's a tax increase in an ad, the polls go down according to him. So I think that they're trying to package this in a very specific way, and I think that's one example of how they're trying to sell this to voters, basically.
And they're flooding the air. I mean, they raised several $1 million just since July 1st. The idea being that this would go for a huge ad buy just the last couple weeks. And that just started this week. And so people will probably see more transportation tax ads than they'll see anything else.
Ads paid for by people who would benefit.
So supporters say, as you see on your screen, this is more money for aging transportation, and it's just necessary. The opposition says the tax is too high, and as you guys pointed out, it's regressive. It affects those. You could say you're paying the same amount of tax on a loaf of bread, no matter how much money you make, or whether or not you're driving
it's
a big
actually
truck.
not taxed on food.
Not
so
taxed. Bad example.
To be fair, we
Thank
have
you.
to.
No,
we have
thank
to
you.
admit that.
No, thank you. Also, an interesting coalition against it.
Yes.
Would you say? Explain
Very
that.
interesting coalition. I mean, on the anti-side, you have people like Governor Jane Nixon, Senator Jill Shoup, people who are very prominent Democrats, pairing with Senator John Lamping, Senator Ed Emery, many conservative groups. I think that is an impressive oppositionary coalition, but the one thing it doesn't have is an opposition group that's spending any money to counteract these ads. And one of the things that Dan Meehan said was, you know, he was kind of concerned about the tax passing, but when the opposition group didn't really spend any money yet, I mean, it's 2 weeks out, I guess that could change, you know, there's nothing on the airwaves counteracting that message. There are people against it, and they're talking to people like me and other journalists, but they're not hitting that media market message, essentially.
And some people kind of, like they have a kind of a, you know, kissing your cousin kind of reaction to it a little bit too. Senator Claire McCaskill, I believe, says, it's not my first choice on how to fund transportation, or is it my first choice on how to fund transportation? Probably not, but it doesn't mean that I'm not willing to support it.
That is also a change from a year ago when she said she would campaign for it when it was a 1-cent sales tax. I think that should be noted.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of this is because some of the major groups who are behind this, aside from business, you also have many labor groups. So you've got officials like McCaskill, who's close to labor. They find themselves in kind of an odd situation where, and this is true in the county executive's race, where Stenger, who is getting a lot of money from the union, says, okay, he's for the amendment, but then he says, you know, I really would prefer another way to raise the money. So you have some people who are reluctantly for it because of who also is for it and who is putting the money up for it.
Will it pass?
It's going to be close.
What do you think,
I think
Chris?
it's going to be close. I mean, it's difficult to get people to vote to tax themselves more, but there are going to be a lot of ads, and there won't be anything to rebut them on.
But and also it's going to depend a lot. This is going to be a low turnout primary.
Right.
St. Louis County may have one of the highest turnouts, and that's probably still going to be low. But I mean, highest compared to other parts of the state,
and
where there may be
probably
hardly
conservative.
anything to vote for.
It should be noted in 2002, while it was not the exact proposal, it was tax increases for transportation. It failed miserably, and I think that as far as the funding setup, it was really similar.
But the
as far as
difference was
campaign.
2002 had a huge Senate race, and this year we don't have that.
Yeah.
Okay, let's switch gears again here and go to something, Chris, I know you've covered. Right to arms, Amendment 5.
Right to bear arms.
Right
yeah.
to bear arms. Can you explain what this is all about?
Well, this is part of the reason why I was saying that I think that the turnout in this election is going to be conservative. I think that this is going to be one of the things that, you know, is obviously driving out supporters of the Second Amendment. So when people go to the polls on August 5th, they're probably going to read this and say, this looks a whole lot like the Second Amendment. And that's probably what's going to be going through their head, and they're probably going to vote for it, if I had to guess. What this would do, though, is actually more subtle and more substantive, which our legal experts can discuss. But this would make every law that pertains to guns and would supposedly infringe upon the Second Amendment subject to what's called strict legal scrutiny. And it would put a much harder legal standard on whether or not it can pass. Right now, you know, we have to have a reasonable reason for doing it. And after strict legal scrutiny, we would have to have an extremely compelling reason to limit gun rights in the state.
And doesn't this also extend to ammunition and some of the other
It does.
stuff?
It does.
Which
And
is unusual. That's different too.
It does, and you know, critics of this say it would take away Missouri's ability to control, conceal, and carry in the state. It would take away the permitting process. So that.
So
that
does
would
it
be
have
a
any
substantive-
teeth or not? Has it been watered down, or does it a little of both?
It'll probably end up in the courts.
It'll definitely end up in the
will
courts,
I mean,
yeah.
there is a belief that if this passes, and what this may very well pass, is that this will probably end up. There'll be a lot of court fights over what this actually means, and whether or not some of this may counter federal law.
And it's already been in the courts.
Yeah.
The ballot language has been challenged. We should point out that this is very similar to something that Louisiana did a couple of years ago. Their ballot language was very different. It said, should we put together the highest legal standard for all sorts of bills that would come through pertaining to gun rights? And ours, it sounds a lot like the Second Amendment, and doesn't really go into sort of the legal minutia that will really be important for this bill, or for this measure.
The toughest Second Amendment law in the country, is that what we would have? I hesitate to say the toughest gun laws because some might interpret that as a restriction, but the toughest anti-gun law
Are you
restriction.
making an allusion to
I'm
like the
asking.
most hardcore Second Amendment bill in the history of the world, of the nullification bill?
I would hesitate to say that we would be the most, because
That's
we would
something
be
the governor
tying,
vetoed last
Yes.
previous session and never became law.
we would be tying Louisiana, because Louisiana already does have this. So it's difficult to say exactly what the ramifications of this would be, because it will be tied up in the courts for a long time.
Probably.